Welcome to the Calm Cockpit. In today's episode, we're talking with Greg Brown, author, career aviator, and flight instructor Hall of Fame inductee, about how to use the unpredictable and dynamic nature of building an aviation career to your advantage. He'll break down how to identify and maximize your unique skills and interests to guide your path forward.
We'll also cover the importance of mentorship and how to build an aviation community to help you succeed during challenging times. Above all, we'll discuss how embracing your journey will help you keep the fun and fulfillment for all of your flying adventures.
The Calm Cockpit Podcast starts now.
12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, a midlife student pilot and licensed yoga and meditation educator with over 30 years of experience teaching high performers how to improve their lives without adding stress.
And I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and professional flight instructor. As we mentioned in the show opener, I'm excited to welcome a special guest to this episode, my friend, Greg Brown.
I feel like so honored and happy and excited for people that they get to listen to this interview. And I get to be this little sort of fly on the wall for all the goodness that Greg offers, because so many of us can relate to what he's going to talk about, where we have this perfect career mapped out and then life happens, either in both challenging ways and in unexpected opportunities that come along the road. So before we get to the interview, John and I just want to introduce you a little bit to his work, his sort of life and times of Greg Brown, so you can really understand the richness of his whole career, which started back around the time that I was born, which is about 50-ish years. So that's a long, robust career. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in how he grew and learned things along the way. Then you'll hear the interview after John and I chat a little bit about his bio. And after Greg's awesome interview and he drops all this great knowledge on all of us, of course, John and I will meet at the end and give a few takeaways so that you can sort of start parsing and piecing out some of his great wisdom and maybe choose one or two to start applying to your life today. So I know he's a longtime friend of you, John, but me listening to Greg from the outside in, so much of what he talked about reminded me of this book by Cal Newport. And the book is called So Good They Can't Ignore You: Why Skills Trump Passion in the Quest for the Work You Love. And here's just a little quote from sort of like the promo for that book. And then I'll talk about why it reminds me so much of Greg. And I think it applies to all of us, whether we're career aviators or hobby flyers. So the quote is, "Matching your job to a pre-existing passion does not matter. Passion comes after you put in the hard work to become excellent at something valuable, not before. In other words, what you do for a living is much less important than how you do it." Again, I just love that idea of what exactly you do is less important than how you do it. I think Greg is amazing at that. And when we did the interview, he's so personable and self-effacing and kind, and he's such an educator and wants to draw everyone into the conversation. He's so enthusiastic about flying. I had read his bio before, but then when I went back and looked at it, I was like, this guy is kind of a badass. Like, he has done all of these amazing things that anyone who is aspiring to be an aviator at any level would look at and go, wow, how did he do that? And so I think it'd be really helpful to kind of break some of these different pieces down, because what he has done consistently is he has followed his interests and his skills and developed them to the highest level. And he's done that in a way that's given him fulfillment at no matter what he's doing. And so wherever you are in your career track, as John and I go through his little bio here, I invite you to sort of look, either dream forward or reflect backward, and look at those threads of passion and interest you have in your own life in the own skill sets that you have a deep ownership of, and ways that you can either expand that into new opportunities or ways that it's led you in kind of a zigzaggy direction. It just offers great perspective, I think, as we sort of try to consider what our flying life means to us. So if I look at his bio, I get to start with his writing. So I'm also a writer, and this is how I first ever met him. Before I ever even flew my first discovery flight, I had read some of his stories. So he wrote 20 years for AOPA Flight Training Magazine, and he wrote the column Flying Carpet, which was all about his adventures flying general aviation. As he says in the interview, I think it was, I have a key in my pocket, and I took all these adventures, and then I got to write about these adventures, and he got paid to do this. How amazing is that? So he actually has a book based off of those articles, which I highly recommend. It's called Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane. He's also written the book, The Savvy Flight Instructor. And one that he references in the interview as well is the Turbine Pilot's Flight Manual that he wrote with Mark Holt. That book in particular, listeners, when you hear him talk about how that book came to be in the interview, you will see that like the career trajectory, you never know where it's going to take you. But if you're developing your skill like he was in writing, that passion and that opportunity naturally follows. So John's going to talk a little bit now about his flying and teaching career, which was epic, to say the least.
Yeah, so he's an extremely accomplished flight instructor. So he started that back in 1979 and was licensed originally in 1972. He has kind of done a little bit of everything when it comes to, accolades and stuff. He has the Wright Brother Master Pilot Award. One that is near and dear to me is he was inducted into the Flight Instructor Hall of Fame. I actually was honored to be able to induct him. So that was really cool for me. And he got inducted at the same time as John and Martha King. So what a day that was. The other thing that I think is really cool, he is the first ever master flight instructor, accredited master flight instructor. And so that was developed by NAFI. It sort of recognizes the most dedicated and the most prolific flight instructors that are operating at the time. And of course, Greg did that multiple times. So really cool. He has been given the Excellence in Pilot Training Awards, and in 2013, AOPA gave him the Let's Go Flying Award. So just lots of different things that he's been recognized for. And, his piloting skills, I think, speak for themselves. You'll hear in the interview that he's also done a little bit of everything, whether it be airlines or corporate, or I think there was even a little bit of charter mixed in there. And then, of course, the things that he does with his own airplanes. So aviation's just in his heart and soul. And you can just tell by the way he speaks about it.
So you can see he's this career aviator. Along the way, he developed this writing career. He also takes amazing photographs, and many of them were featured along with his Flying Carpet column and in his book. And he's also had museum exhibits and solo exhibits. They are actually stunning. I mean, they're a world unto himself. If he wanted to make that a singular career, he could have done that. Along the way, you'll also hear in the interview that he has some background in industrial design. He has an MFA, Master of Fine Arts in Art and Design. He also has a bachelor's degree in architectural studies. What else does he do? I'm sure there's things that have been left off this list. Truly amazing. He taught at Purdue for a number of years, not in aviation, but I believe that was in the industrial design faction that you might hear a wisp of in the interview. So I think he just is this great example of really building all of these skills to this deep level, and skills that he felt were very fulfilling, which naturally led to this passion and naturally led to back to my first point, which is that he was so good that people couldn't ignore him. And no matter what job he did, people were always advocating for him to have more and more opportunities. So without further ado, let's go on and listen to this fabulous interview with Greg Brown.
Hey, Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, John and Gita.
Well, we're very proud to have you a part of this episode. And just to kind of reiterate what we're going to be talking about today, we sort of have two sides to this. The first is that I think you had kind of a similar experience to what I did in sort of getting into aviation professionally. I know that you started off in one path and you sort of ended up in another path, and I'm going to let you kind of explain it, and then I'll sort of chime in as needed. But let's talk a little bit about how you got into aviation and the different directions that you went.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's kind of a long story, but first I want to bring up there's a cliche, life is a journey. And I think we all set up, especially as young people, thinking, well, we're going to figure out what that path is. We're going to just take it and we're going to get there. And that's not true for most of us. It was certainly not true for me. And just in the biggest picture, in terms of the theme of this podcast, I think it's really important to enjoy those steps of the journey, not head down a path and think, well, if I don't make this path, I'm a failure. So that being said, my dad was a pilot. He owned airplanes. He had a 310 when I was a little kid. We used to fly all over the place in it. And when I was in college at University of Wisconsin, I got my private at age 19, which is a lot of years ago. And when I graduated, I wanted to fly airlines. And we had some friends, my dad's had some friends who like flew corporate. And in those days, corporate meant flying like reconditioned World War II bombers, P-26s and things like that. And corporate was pretty rough stuff. It was unpressurized airplanes flying down low, most of it. Anyway, the problem was glasses. In those days, the airlines and military required uncorrected 20/20 vision. So I had to face the fact that although I wanted to fly airlines, at that point, it looked like I would never do it. I would never have that opportunity. So I went down the flight training path, got my CFI and instructed many, many hours, met a whole lot of cool people. And one day I had a student. I was giving him instrument instruction. He was a professor at Purdue, where I was also teaching at that time, but not in aviation. But he also owned a scientific instrument company. And he said, Greg, what would you think about quitting the university and coming to work for my scientific instrument company? And you'd have two jobs. You'd be chief pilot and director of design, because I had a product design background. I was like, well, that's pretty crazy, but tell me more. And he said, well, we'd like to buy a twin and have you fly as corporate. He said, as you know, we sell at universities all over the country. We go to different conferences and so on. We'd like to get an airplane, a cabin class airplane, and have you fly it. So I said to him at the time, Pete, this is totally cool, but you need to know I only have 25 hours of multi-time. And that conversation, which was in the airplane, I learned a big lesson. The lesson was, he said, you've given me a lot of instruction. You're very good. You have good judgment. I'd be totally comfortable having my team fly with you. He said, I've looked into this already. You'll have to obviously have some thorough checkouts. We're going to have to pay a premium for insurance, but I have no doubt you'll be a terrific corporate pilot. So lesson one was, if you got somebody who believes in you, that's worth more than an experience. Okay. And we'll talk more about that later if you want to. And then when I was in my late 30s, the Vietnam era pilots were starting to retire. And all of a sudden they dropped the glasses requirement. So my buddies who didn't wear glasses and were working at the majors, I started getting these messages, Greg, get some turbine time and we'll get you on here at the majors where we were. So I thought about that for a while and thought, okay, I'm going to do that. So I closed down my consulting business and with the support of my wife, and went to full-time instructing. And I applied for some regionals to get some turbine time. And then I realized I didn't know anything about jets or turbine aircraft at all, because I've been flying piston airplanes all these years. So I went to the library, of course, no internet in those days. And then I went to bookstores looking for a book that would explain the basics of turbine aircraft. No such book existed. Everybody was trained by the company, as they are now. So I got hired at a regional, which was at that time a US Air Express regional, and flew with them. In the meantime, as I got trained, I worked with another fellow named Mark Holt on that book because it just seemed like, being a product design guy, there was a market for that book. Okay. And I flew for the regionals. Now, this regional, we were based at LAX. We had displaced some US Air flights, which caused some animosity, but the company went downhill from the moment I was hired. And I actually flew some flights with others for planes that had been repossessed by the manufacturer at this regional. And this is something that comes down to, life as a pilot. When I started applying for regionals, it was a hiring boom. When I got going over there, there was a bit of a recession and people were getting laid off and people were not getting hired. So the airline went downhill and it ultimately failed in 1993. And so on that day, I'm like, and my wife is like, well, what are you going to do? Which was appropriate. And I said, well, I either need to go get a different job right away, or I wonder if it's worth finishing this book about how turbine airplanes work. So not knowing that writers normally use an agent, I called the editor-in-chief of the major aviation press of the day, which was Iowa State University Press. And I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. So I talked to the editor-in-chief, a guy named Bill Silag. He was a really cool guy. And I said, hey, I just lost my job as we called him commuter airline pilot in those days. And I've been working on this book. And I'm trying to decide whether to finish it. Is it worth doing? I was really just calling him for advice. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's an introduction to turbine aircraft. At the time, we had a different name in mind for it than it came out to be later. But the bottom line is, I started telling him about this book, and he said, within the first 5 sentences, he said, how soon can I see it?
Wow.
And I was like, well, I'm only about 60% done. I haven't done any fact checking. He said, that's okay. How soon can I see it? Will you FedEx it to me? Can I get it tomorrow? Right. So that was pretty interesting. The bottom line is I sold that book and another book on this one phone call. And we just came out with the 5th edition. It's the Turbine Pilot's Flight Manual. So that set me off on this other path that led to magazine writing and so on. I worked for NBAA for a while, doing business development stuff with some other people for flight schools. And I continued to instruct and ended up writing an instruction. I thought I'm done with instructing, so I'm going to write a book about that and get all that on the table. Well, of course, that led to more instructing. The bottom line is where I ended up for the last 20 years is I wrote for AOPA's magazine, Flight Training, and I wrote a travel adventure column, and I have an airplane key in my pocket, and we flew all over and had great adventures, and we still do. But for the 20 years, I wrote about these adventures. So the bottom line is I've been down all these paths, and every one of them was a blast in a different way.
So I have so many follow-up questions, and I love doing these interviews because you never really know exactly where some of these questions are going to take you. And, I think the first thing to bring up, because I have experience having switched paths myself, did you have any kind of identity crisis or any of that kind of stuff? Because for me, when I left the 121 world, I had a job lined up in 135. So I left freely and I left knowing I was going to do it. And it was very purposeful. However, with all of those things aside, I walked into my first sort of 135 day, still kind of wondering who I was now and kind of longing for a world that I just voluntarily left. And it was this very weird feeling of I was happy to be doing this new thing, but I kind of lost track of, well, I thought I was going to be an airline pilot. I thought this was what I was destined to be. This is who I am. It's so ingrained into everything that I know about myself that now I'm not sure who I am anymore. Did you have a similar experience, or what was that like for you?
So John, you only had one identity crisis in the course of your career?
There's still time.
I had one every time. Absolutely. I mean, I think all of us, especially early on, we see airline captains and we recognize what a cool job that is, and that's something we want to do. And then every time you make a change and you've got new things to learn and you're back to the junior guy on the block the junior pilot on the block. I think it's really tough. I actually had a really disturbing experience, which I didn't mention in there, where I really went through that crisis, which was shortly before the commuter airline, the regional that I flew for, went out of business. Because they were going downhill all the time, I never upgraded to captain there because of seniority, right? So I never became a captain. So at the time, Southwest Airlines, their minimum, I had thousands of hours already, but they were piston. They wanted 2,500 turbine. It did not have to be PIC, and a type rating, 737 type rating. And so again, with my lovely wife Jean's encouragement, we borrowed like $10,000 because you had to fly the airplane in those days to get your type. It wasn't all done in the simulator. There's a simulator portion. You actually fly the 737 in the middle of the night. We were shooting engine out approaches at Yuma, Arizona. I still remember. But anyway, we did that. We borrowed the money. I went and got a type rating, and I had done some networking and I was friends with the chief pilot for Southwest in Phoenix. And he had told me, as soon as you get your type rating, you call me up and we'll go have lunch together and we'll make this happen. I get the type rating. I call up the chief pilot. We make a lunch date. And within a week, I get a letter from Southwest because I had an application on file. The letter said, we have changed our hiring requirements, and now we require 2,500 turbine PIC. And I had, except for my check ride, 0. So that was a dark day for me because just what I had finally, after I was, I think, 38. So between 19 and 38, all those years, I'd wished I could be an airline pilot. And then I was on this path and I had it all set up and it was going to work. And then all of a sudden it was gone. So that was pretty tough. And it lasted several years because I was in the, to use a piloting term, zone of confusion about what I should do next. I continued to fly and so on. And then once the books came out, that gave me new direction, but that took time.
Do you ever wish you had tried to go back to a regional while you were writing, or was it kind of a time commitment? It's got to be one or the other sort of thing for you.
That's a great question. I think part of it was as the hiring went down and I was already, approaching 40. And because hiring was down, I was getting really to the old side of ever making it to the majors. We all know people who love doing it, and it's a fabulous career. And there's no doubt the money in it to travel all over the world. It's a wonderful career. But we tend to forget about, there are a lot of other really cool careers that aren't obvious. Like I have one friend who flew for Wyoming Game and Fish and then Arizona Game and Fish departments. So he's getting good pay in a state job with retirement, a pension, benefits, and he's flying through the Grand Canyon carrying biologists while they're tracking condors and landing in remote areas to pick up pronghorn antelope that need to be examined. And does that not sound like a pretty cool job too? Not necessarily everybody wants to do those, but these are the things you begin to see, just like with you, John, going to a terrific corporate position.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's funny because when we talk about the original idea of the episode and we're talking about choosing life over career and passions and things like that, I think that the prime question that I have for you is how did you separate the idea of what you thought you were supposed to do from this is my purpose, this is where I think I'm best suited? How did you find that passion or choose amongst multiple passions to make that your career?
I'm gonna just read you a quick quote from E.B. Jepson, right? The founder of Jepson Company. There's a big difference between a pilot and an aviator. One is a technician, the other is an artist in love with flight. That's a thought-provoking thing, right? I'm going to read it once more. There's a big difference between a pilot and an aviator. One is a technician, the other is an artist in love with flight. So why do I say that? Because there are a lot of reasons why someone chooses a career. You've got to be in love with the idea of flying airplanes. You got to be excited about what you're going to see, the cool people you're going to meet, the travel you're going to have. And you have to be driven by those things, in my opinion. it's a tough career in many ways. You're away from your family in most flying jobs. Every new step, every new rating, every new aircraft you check out in, you and I, John, have talked about this when you go to flight safety and there's always the feeling, I may fail. What if I fail? Now, the good news is we don't fail very often. If we do fail, we just try it again. But we can make it happen. It's doable. But it's not so doable if you are not highly motivated by something. And I think it's really important that that motivation be largely loving to fly. Because the fact is, flying a 150 is a lot of fun. And flying a jet is a lot of fun. And flying a balloon is a lot of fun. And if that's what motivates you. So I've always had so much fun with flying. Yes, I've been discouraged professionally several times in the course of that path, more than several, but I could roll through it because I think if you view this career as a chance to do something exciting that most people will never get to do, to fly an airplane, to see the sights, to feel the thrill, climb through a cloud layer and burst out on top, to shoot an approach down to 200 feet. And amazingly, there's the runway right there. And then the thrill of turning other people onto it as a mentor and I find that that's what's driven me through all this stuff. Because periods of big disappointment. I was horribly disappointed when the airline thing didn't come through. And I still, I'll be honest with you, I still regret sometimes that I didn't get to do it because look at all the cool stuff they get to do. But then again, I get to do some cool stuff too. So I don't know if that's directly in line with your question. I think if you go in strictly with the idea of being an airline pilot because you make a lot of money or something, I think it's very difficult. It's a hard path. Gita, you are learning for fun, or are you looking at a professional career, or do you know?
I don't know. Hearing you guys talk about the identity crisis that happens when you have a dream job in aviation that maybe isn't going to happen, or you decide you want something else. I've had the opposite of coming into aviation and having an identity crisis. What do you mean I'm an aviator? I didn't plan my life around that fact. I was supposed to be writing and teaching and very comfortable in that. And suddenly there's this new passion and this new love that I've completely fallen in love with. So I am trying to figure that out. I think it's very interesting to hear you say, though, that it has to be fun, because I came to flying general aviation to get over a fear of flying. So my first 4 months, I would not categorize that as fun at all. I was working through a very, serious phobia. But along the way, we would take fun flights when it would all get to be a little bit too much for me. The drinking through the fire hose, my teacher would say, "Hey, let's go to Nantucket. I live here in New England. We can fly to Nantucket, have lunch, hang out." And along the way, we trained emergency procedures. We did flight following. We did all the things, but we got to have food partway through and just enjoy what it was like to be up a little bit higher and just cruising along with not a lot to do for those longer portions of it. So this notion of creating endurance through having fun does get a lot of pushback from the type A workaholics, but it really does work because it fuels us to keep going forward. And
You
this
have
whole
a superb instructor.
I do. I know.
That's really, if you think about the going through life, and like you had mentioned in our casual chat before today's recording session, you were telling me about your career as a musician. That's another one that's a very challenging career. You're competing against a lot of other people. The imposter syndrome probably is even worse with a musician than with a pilot. I don't know, but
Yeah.
But the fact is, and then you ran it, you found over time it ceased to be fun for you, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And as soon as it ceases to be fun, and this applies directly, right, to our pro piloting experiences, it ceases to be fun. That really slows down your initiative to be better, to move up, to move on, to climb new mountains, check out a new aircraft, and everything in life. I think if you're having fulfillment from it, whether it's fun with a capital F or something else. It's all about having that motivation. And there's a fellow I admire a lot, my friend Sergio. He lives in Texas. He was an engineer and is a career changer. He had been a pilot, owned a 172 and flew around with his family and stuff, but he wanted to go pro. And he went to one of the regionals, headed for the majors, and he didn't enjoy the training for it a lot. He was challenged by it. That was those of us who change careers late in life. I'll point this out. If you go from single pilot to multi-pilot crews, that is an adjustment, and you need to prepare for that. You need to be prepared for the challenge. That's something nobody talks about. They're always talking about the equipment, but going to a multi-pilot crew is a new thing, and it takes a little while to get used to it. Anyway, he just wasn't enjoying that environment, and then being away from his family and so on. So he took a job with one of the FedEx feeders, and he's flying a Caravan back and forth between 3 or 4 cities in Texas, and he's happy as a clam. It fits. He loves to fly, and he's doing it. He's making a good living. He's home every night, and I admire him a lot, because I think to make that change, say, but I got into the airline, but I'm not going to do this because I don't like it. I think that takes a lot of guts, but it goes along with that thing of, like you were saying, John, life has to come first.
I think, and again, I think with Gita's path, it's similar. Not that I'm speaking for you, but I think there's that moment that you finally have to understand that what you want is different than what you think society wants you to do. When you're an airline pilot, society thinks you're cool. Society thinks, oh, you must make all this money and do all these cool things. And, in some cases that's true. In some cases it's maybe not so true. And that was, for me, part of why leaving was so difficult, because it's like, I'm not that cool, but people think I'm kind of cool sometimes. How do I walk away from that? And how is it that if everybody else thinks it's cool, that what I'm going to do could even potentially match up to something like that? And that's, I think, the sort of insidious part of it squeaking into your identity, because you're letting the world tell you who you are instead of coming up with your own idea of what makes you happy.
It's so true, isn't it? What you're saying, John, it's not about societal stuff so much, whether society thinks you're important. It's whether you think you're doing something fun, and people around you respect and appreciate your accomplishment. And so whether you're flying corporate, whether you're a crop duster, whether you're a flight instructor, John, I think Mark Boguski. He's a fellow that had a corporate career, went into instructing. He loves it. He's fantastic at it. He's getting all these national recognition for it. Is he better or worse than an airline pilot? No. He's just as valid, and he's happy and fulfilled. And that's, I think, where we all have to readjust when we're going through crisis about, am I going to make this goal I told everyone I was going to make, and into, am I doing stuff I think is rewarding?
And for some people, that rewarding might be captain of blah, 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 flying the route to Paris every week.
Absolutely.
And for some people, it might be puttering my little bug smasher all the way to Sedona, but it's about actually having that intrinsic center of control where you're matching what's inside of you with what you're doing outside. And that when you're in harmony with that, then your choices naturally flow from that place instead of from the outside in.
But I think if you look at each position and opportunity in this context of what am I going to get out of it? Is it going to be fun? Is it going to be rewarding? And I think it's really important to keep that sort of perspective, because you don't know the curves that are going to, like in my case, yes, I really do wish I had gotten a chance to fly airlines, major airlines, but I'd be hard pressed to figure out what I would trade out of my life.
And I think that is a great segue into kind of the other topic that I wanted to talk to you about, because Greg, you have, as an instructor, you've had a lot of time in a mentorship role, seeing them at some of their highest places and seeing probably some at their lowest places. Certainly I've seen that in myself over the years, both as a student and just as a general pilot. And you've taken that passion and that idea and you've actually created something with it. For those that don't know, you created the Student Pilot Pep Talk group on Facebook. And, I think there's a lot of pilot groups out there in social media and in other places. And some of them last and some of them serve their purpose and sort of fade away. And yours has become one of the most followed and prolific communities in social media, at least that I'm aware of. And it's really interesting. It got me thinking about the idea of, mentorship is important, but community is important too. Having somebody to talk to or a group of people to talk to who've either, experienced that or have a way to sort of build you back up again, I think is just so important. And what led to you creating this, and what kind of things have you seen by sort of viewing this from afar in terms of building this community?
Back in the dawn of the internet era, America Online, AOL, had the first chat type forums. You remember those things?
Yes, I do.
And they were not so different from a Facebook group. We couldn't do pictures or anything, but people, could type in there and others could answer. And I started two forums at the time. One was a professional pilot forum, and the other was a student pilot forum. And at that time, if you think about people learning to fly, and again, we all know this is tough stuff, right? From the day you take your first lesson to the day you check out in your final airline cockpit, you're going to be challenged all along the way. What happened was, because this was before, at the very dawn of social media, you start to see people who would join these groups and they're taking lessons in rural Wisconsin or, places where there is no network, no community, or they're in a big city and everybody is rushing in and out of the place and there's no community for different reasons, right? And I learned a tremendous amount from this. I saw all these people who were encountering what we all do during training. And I'm going to talk about this at the private pilot level just because I think it explains it best. But you're out there in rural Wisconsin, you don't know anybody else, and you're on your 7th lesson trying to nail landings, and you're thinking, I'm a loser. I'm not cut out for this. And there's nobody around to tell you anything. And what I already knew was, if you're in a place where you got some friends, like let's say I can tell you too, I've done some horrible landings. I know that if I had a horrible landing, I was walking away discouraged. I know that Gita or John, if I bumped into you on my way out and I was done with my lessons, I wasn't going to come back and spend $300 again tomorrow. And you talked to me for 10 minutes and gave me a pep talk. You would turn me around. You would tell me, hey, it took me 30 lessons to get my landings down. In fact, I still bounce landings today in the jet or whatever. The presence of those other people to tell you, to make you understand in this very difficult career we've chosen, that you can overcome this. Also to give you guidance like, maybe you need to fly with a different instructor. And so the bottom line is that's where the pep talk came from, because I saw this whole bunch of people who were not connected before. And that's why the Student Pilot Pep Talk group ultimately exists. But that led to a great deal of my philosophy as an instructor and so on, and my interest in community. And in my Savvy Flight Instructor book, I have a whole chapter, several chapters in there aimed at flight schools, like the flight schools that do barbecues and things to get everybody together so that the students get to know each other and they can all commiserate about how tough it is to nail crosswind landings. But to know you're not alone. It's not me that can't do this. It's a challenge for everyone. And to find out that everyone who stuck with it could overcome it. You don't fail till you quit. So that is the source of the whole pep talk thing. It goes all the way back to those days. That whole idea that you're leaving the airport after a bad lesson, and virtually any pilot can give that person a pep talk and they will turn around and stay. But without the pep talk, they're going to leave it. They'll be gone. And so I've really gotten a lot of joy out of creating these communities and the online opportunities. Now, relative to mentorship, we all know without those special mentors in our lives, and we could name them, right?
Oh, yeah.
We wouldn't be where we are. And one thing I'm really concerned about, and I think our audience, it's worth thinking about this. There's been a change, a cultural change, largely due to social media and where people are doing less verbal interaction. And mentorship almost seems to be out of style with younger people in particular. And it's not a fault that it's out of style, but it's sad because without mentors, life is much tougher. And also the reward of being a mentor and how good you feel when you've helped somebody is huge. But for example, I'll run into very often to rampers at the airport. I fly light airplane now. I'm retired from any kind of professional flying. And I'll meet someone at the airport. He's pumping fuel into the plane, or she's pumping fuel into the plane, and we're talking. And oh yeah, they're headed for a piloting career and all that. And I'll say, well, here's my phone number if you want to talk to me. Or I'll say, maybe we could go up sometime. Another thing is with Facebook, with all the faults and problems of Facebook, it's the only place where in my experience, where you can have an interactive group like the Pep Talk group with lots of people giving feedback on things. Everything else is just transmit and receive. Instagram, Telegraph, TikTok. So I think my advice to someone who has a pilot career in mind, you got to be part of a community of some kind, whether it's people who get together on the weekends, whether it's on Facebook, and you need to take advantage of people who you meet who are more experienced, who can and will help you, and then you need to do that for them. Mentorship opens doors. And if you're a young junior pilot who's on your way someplace now professionally, you need to make those contacts. You need to befriend those people. You need to know that some of them at least will be eager to help you. And you want to develop those relationships. And you also need to know that you're not taking advantage of them. They're not dummies. If they want to help you, they're going to enjoy it. It makes them feel good as well as helping you. So I think one way to look at this is if you have that setback, John, that you brought up earlier, where you're discouraged, you have questions about yourself and your own success, what can you do now? One thing you can do is you get out there, meet some people, develop some relationships, and help get confidence and the connections to head down whatever path you're going to choose.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm going to regurgitate some of this back to you, but I think that entrenches the idea of community and the need for it. It's sharing your failures, it's sharing your successes, it's knowing that you're not alone in either of those two things. The other important point to this, and I think it's a synonym for community, and you touched on this, is networking, right? And in my role for the outreach that I do, I communicate with a lot of young people. I wish I could consider myself, I was a young person not that long ago, and it pains me to not be part of that group anymore. But nevertheless, as much as we want to say that we are a digital world, we're operating with very high-tech equipment, with complex pieces of technology and all this other stuff, more than a lot of other professions, we're actually pretty analog. And I say that in the sense that aviation, the cliche is that we're a small community, and it's not a cliche, it's true. And the idea of meeting somebody, the idea of having a tangible interaction, shaking their hands, introducing yourself, sometimes it can be the hardest thing in the world to do, to go up to somebody. I struggle with that still. And I've practiced for a long time to pretend that I'm not an introvert.
But that is what matters.
So I think when I think about my little land that I'm in, general aviation, a lot of the people at my flight school, they're flying for fun. They want to take their families out. We do have some career track, but by and large, it's folks who want to fly for fun. And so I'm thinking about this idea of community and mentors, how crucial that is going to be if you are going to be a single pilot in your piston flying around. Because once you're launched from flight school, we don't have dispatch. Sometimes we're not talking to ATC. Like, we wear all the hats. We're the flight planner, the route picker, the all the things, the baggage handler. We're literally doing all of that. And if we don't have a robust community of people around us that we can talk to and check in about our flight plan for that day, or how we're doing, or just the general thing that's going on at our local airport, I could see a great decrease in our skills and our safety if we don't have those kind of checks and balances and community mentors around us that might be built into some of the systems that you fly in if you're a flying career. And I know for me, back to what you were saying about training, you could be isolated. For sure, it felt that way my first 3 or 4 months of training. Partly it's because I was coming at it with a fear of flying. So I was like, get in, get out, just like, try not to melt down in front of the people at the airport. But it's lonely because, as you said, people, they come in and then they leave and then they're on to the next lesson. And as soon as I started making a few friends, finding a few mentors, and reaching out, from, in my case, Women in Aviation International was very helpful in that regard, because I found a mentor. Oh, it's fantastic. Got a mentor. Yeah, I got a mentor through them. It made a huge difference. And it reminds me, hearing you talk, of when I was in conservatory undergrad for classical music. And my teacher at the time was Pete Hadcock, who played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra for 25 years. And he told me after my lesson one day, he said, now make sure when you're practicing that you go out in the hallway and you find another student and you talk to them and grab them and take them into your practice room with you and play duets and just mess around. I'm like, no, this is Pete Hadcock. He's like a legend in clarinet land, right? He's like a god. And he's telling me to like find a friend and mess around and play some duets. And he said, I learned more in my undergrad in those times talking in the hallway between lessons, messing around with duets, he said, than I ever did when I was woodshedding in the practice room by myself. And I was like, that is great advice. So I think along with the pep talk, though, what we learn in those moments, it's also sometimes skills. Sometimes someone will say something in just a slightly different way than your flight instructor said it, or they'll just kind of give you a little different perspective on that crosswind landing. So it's not just the feel goods, it's actually like tactical skills that you learn. And sometimes we miss that, as you said, in the digital age, when you're just consuming content one way, that interplay of someone saying, yeah, me too. And what helped me was to tack that left aileron down in the wind, even though your flight instructor has said that 50 million times. Hearing it from that other person can sometimes unlock it. So I think this whole idea of mentorship and community in person and via Facebook is a real benefit. And I know for me as a midlife pilot, it was very isolating at first. When it became not isolating is when some of the fun started, and I started to get more traction and move faster in my training. So have more fun and advance your skills. What could be better? Someone should make a podcast about that.
Well, one other thing too, and I know this is a big part of why this podcast exists, has to do with those periods where you do fail. And you feel like you've lost it. And I have actually a couple of favorite sayings about this that I try to use on myself when I need them. One is from Vince Lombardi. It's not whether you're knocked down, it's whether you get up again. Very simple, but it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up again. And then the other is from Winston Churchill, who's the master of great sayings, but great. Success is the ability to go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. Right? Success is the ability to go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And nowhere is that more true than in flying, than in piloting, because we are all put on the spot all the time. Every phase check, every check ride, every proficiency check, every recurrent training, we are faced with overcoming some kind of either minor or major failure. And I actually know somebody who had to take 9 check rides to get their CFI. Now, one can get into why it took 9 check rides, whether things could have been done differently, whether there were flaws. I don't know. All I know is that, wow, that person stuck it out and has gone on to a major career because this pilot was willing to keep trying until they got it. Now, obviously, none of us need 9 check rides failed on our record, but the bottom line is failing 1 or 2, or just feeling like you failed on a flight review or something like that. You got to get up and go on to the next one, and you'll pass the next one or the third one, and then you're on your way. But you can't let that stuff stop you. So you have to be prepared. And again, this is where community really helps. But that's critical because rumors float around. You'll hear people say, oh, I can't go to the airlines because I failed my instrument. Well, that's not true. Now, again, if the person with 9 failures, that gets tougher. But the bottom line is everybody fails a check ride or 2. These setbacks are part of being a pilot, and you usually learn more from those failures than you learn from the ones you do right.
Yeah, as we start to wind down here, I've been hanging on to this little tidbit since the very beginning because I've been waiting to bring it back up again. Something you said in the first few minutes really got my attention, and I think it's apropos here when we're talking about mentors and community and all of that stuff. And I'm not going to say it nearly as eloquently as you did, but you said something along the lines of sometimes we just need somebody else to believe in us to succeed. And, I think that's important. And it's come up multiple times through different episodes that we've recorded where, you might not think you're good enough, but you have to trust your instructor that you can pass, or you have to trust your mentor that you can do this job, or your boss when they put you on a mission you've never done before. And you're going, I don't know. I've never landed in Aspen before. Like, what am I supposed to do? I think that that's so important, even if it comes from a Facebook group from somebody you've never met before, where you have described your situation and you're feeling deflated, and that person, the right person at the right time, comes up and says, you're a member of this group and here's where the value is because I'm going to lift you back up again. And I think that holds true for all of us. But I think it needs to go one step further, and it's the harder part of the two things. And I think that's not only do you sometimes need somebody to believe in you, but you have to believe them. and that is extremely difficult in some cases. And you have to trust in yourself beyond that I have the skills because I belong here because I've done this, and go back and listen to the imposter syndrome episode that we have already aired, because that's a main part of this. And it's funny how these main themes keep coming back. That's and true. So, as we sort of put the bow on this, I think it makes the most sense to really let those words resonate. Let it be that people believe in you for a reason. And in that case, you should believe in yourself too.
I love that. And if I may, I'll add one other related observation about that. Most of us are nervous prior to many flights, not to mention nervous prior to a check ride. On a given flight, we might be worried about the weather. It might be an airport that's new to us in unusual terrain. It could be an aircraft right out of maintenance. There's plenty of things to worry about. And then when you start looking at check rides or proficiency checks or checking out in a new aircraft, training in a new aircraft, there's plenty to worry about. And I agree 100% that getting the gouge from somebody else and encouragement from somebody else that you can go ahead and do this is critical. But another part that's critical in my mind is that you gather all the information you can prior to going into these situations through your own analysis of it and also through the advice of others. And if all the indications are that you've done the homework and that you have the information, you got to squelch the butterflies and go for it. You cannot let yourself be stopped by being nervous. So I find for myself anyway, over all these years of piloting, if I didn't take off every time that I had been nervous, if I didn't take a check ride because I was nervous, I wouldn't be a pilot. I wouldn't go anywhere. And so to me, that's a really major thing is always take the best research you can do, logic and facts, the support of others, information, and go by that. Do not go by gut feel. You'll hear people talk about gut feel. Now, if gut feel is based on doing a lot of homework, that's one thing. But if gut feel is like, well, all the indications are I can go safely, but I'm nervous, you cannot succeed as a pilot if you let the nerves stop you. Now, there are always going to be times when you're nervous and it works against you, more often on a check ride than on an actual flight. On an actual flight, you usually find out that if you've done your homework and you know it's a safe thing to do, even though you're worried about it, as soon as the wheels leave the ground, you're fine.
And sometimes a little bit of nerves sharpens your edge a little. It
It
makes you better because you're thinking about the important things. Well, Greg, I think as with so many of our guests, I think we could go another 2 hours in talking with you and trying to get all of your secrets for success. And unfortunately, that means that we'll have to save it for another episode if you'll ever come back. But I think that what we've talked about today has a tremendous value for everybody, at varying degrees of progression and skill level. So, Geeta, do you have any final thoughts?
No, this was fantastic. And as usual, I'm the official note taker for the podcast. I have several pages of notes, so I consider it a great opportunity to learn. And it's just really appreciated you sharing all of your insights culled from decades of experience. But it seems to me like you're a lifelong learner as well. So I really appreciate you modeling that for us and the audience. It's been super beneficial. I've learned a lot. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. We do this amazing thing that most people in the world envy and admire us for, and they can't imagine the rewards we get. And if you think about from the beginning of the time, how many people have piloted an airplane, have gotten to fly, the dream that goes back to the ancients, it's very few. And I myself, I've been flying 54 years. I soloed in 1972. Okay. I've been a pilot for over 40% of the entire history of powered flight. Think about that. That's mind blowing. And so very few of us have done this, even though we know a lot of people are competing for jobs we might want. But we are so fortunate to do this amazing thing. And there are plenty of people out there who make more money than we do and are very successful in their jobs, their office jobs or their, other types of earthbound jobs. And they look at us and they think we're doing something mighty cool. And I think it's important, along with your professional friends and your fellow pilots, I think it's important to interact enough with people who are not pilots to appreciate, even if you're flying a 150, the admiration that inspires in other people.
I agree. They're the only ones that think I'm cool.
True.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as John and I did. And as I said in the actual interview, I do have tons of notes, but what I tried to do here is collate them down into a couple of takeaways. I think we have 6 or 7 takeaways. That's more than a couple, I recognize, but 6 or 7 takeaways of these key ideas and concepts that came up again and again in the episode. Just sort of put it in outline form for you to start to think about ways that you can use these in your own life to find that fulfillment. And that's the first takeaway. I don't know how many times I heard him say the word fun in the interview. In fact, we could go back and do one of those searches where it finds every time he says fun. And as we did the interview, it really started to define itself a little bit more, that what he was actually saying with fun was that other F word, fulfillment. And he said, finding the fun and fulfillment is kind of this reoccurring theme, because when it ceases to be fun and fulfilling, he says, quote, it really damps down our initiative to push forward and conquer new challenges, end quote. And that really struck me, because we get into flying because there's some kind of love or passion for it. And it's usually the middle bit where people quit, right? When the end seems like so far off, you can't conceive that you're a person who will be able to do that. And the fun and excitement of like that initial rush has worn off. And I was questioning at some points, listening to him, going, is it always going to be fun? Because it's not always fun, nor should it just be like, yay, rainbows and kittens, and I was so awesome and sparkled joy. Like, that's not realistic. But that deeper word, fulfillment, really struck a chord in me. And it's actually helped me to sort of reflect on, because I've had a little bit of time since we've recorded this, to reflect on, am I being fulfilled with what I'm doing with aviation? I'm in that middle bit. The check ride is like, I don't know, 5 to 6 months, maybe a little bit more down the road for me. And I'm in that solo phase, and it all just seems like, is it ever going to get done? And so I was like, you know what? Let me look at those fulfilling aspects. And it's helped me to sort of change my perspective. So I think that's just a really great kind of touchstone. Are you having fun with it? If it's not a fun time, that's okay. Is there a way that you can shift things to move towards that more fulfilling aspect of it? Or find people that can help you lift up and get that fulfillment. Because without that, man, I think a lot of people probably quit in that middle part. And if they had a little fun or a little more fulfillment, it would sustain them through, and they'd be able to find that they can actually make it through that challenge. So that's takeaway number 1.
Yeah, and that hits home for me too, because as a flight instructor, part of my job is to make sure that the students are at least enjoying the process. Not everything is the best day ever, but you got to recognize that people are spending, their hard-earned money and time, and they're there because they enjoy it, and you want to make sure that that stays even through some of the hardships. So another thing that hit home for me from this interview with Greg is just the idea of curiosity, and how essential that is to the previous tip of finding your fun and fulfillment. Allow these things to fascinate you, allow them to sort of dig into the root of yourself, so that you can, really find that enjoyment. And sometimes you find out that what you thought was going to drive you is actually not what you think. You start in one place and go, this is the reason why I'm doing this, only to find out that there's this whole other aspect that you didn't know existed that is even more fun and even more exciting. And you don't really figure that out until you've gone through the process. And I think that was a huge thing that hits home from Greg, is just allowing yourself to sort of mold into the process, be morphable, and absorb those things that maybe you didn't even know existed.
I love that. We're going to be morphable. That's
any word.
But that is, if for those of us who are a bit longer in tooth, I say that as a 50-plus-year-old woman. Absolutely, that ability to use that curiosity to help naturally lead to jobs that highlight and make use of your depth of skill is fantastic. And it reminds me again of that work of Cal Newport in the book, Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. No, Cal, I'm not plugging your book, but it's a very good one, because instead of feeling like every job has to fulfill every passion that I have, otherwise I'm not going to do it, it's like, no, are you bringing curiosity to everything you're doing? Then you naturally build your skills to this really deep level. And then you're so good that people, like again with Greg, they're one of your students and they look at you, they say, hey, I want to make you my chief pilot. That guy was his instrument student who then made him chief pilot. And I think it was the head of design. That only happens because he was finding that fun, that fulfillment, and that curiosity. So another takeaway is gratitude is key. And gratitude is one of those things that it can sound a little wishy-washy until you really drill down to it. And there's a difference between knowing this is what I wanted to do, like what you were saying, John, of like, I have this idea of my career. This is what I wanted to do, versus finding those things of this is what I'm best suited for and where I'm a good fit. And sometimes there is a cognitive dissonance between what we think we want and what our skills are actually best matched for. Like for me, I was this performer and loved it. I was decent at it. However, I was even better at teaching. And it took time after time after time of like knocking my head into a wall with performing to me finally go, oh, duh, my skills are actually best suited over here, even though it was different than what I thought it was going to be. And we find that in aviation, and Greg talks about his own disappointment with never making it really to flying for the majors. But he said it can be this tough career. And if you view it as having a chance to do this thing that people only dream of, and you have that gratitude, then everything becomes this thrilling adventure. And I think that really came through. So be grateful for what you have. It's pretty cool that we get to do this thing.
Well, and gratitude is attitude, right? You know, people can sense when you're grateful for it, but they can also sense when you have a passion and enjoy. And those are the kinds of things that can open up doors that you didn't realize you had. If he had been with this student and said, boy, I really want to be doing this thing, and that student sensed that he didn't want to be there in that moment, that he didn't enjoy what he did, that opportunity of being chief pilot or flying for a company would have never happened. He would have found somebody else who wanted to be there with him in that process. So I think that's
Right.
super important. And, you know, all of these things dovetail on each other. And so the next thing we talked about was thinking outside the box. And I like to sort of think about this. There's an old Jim Carrey movie, and I don't remember the title of it, but essentially the idea is that Jim Carrey played this guy who never took a leap. He never took an opportunity for what it was. And so throughout the course of the movie, he made a promise to himself that says, I'm going to start saying yes to things. And I think that that's important. I mean, obviously in the movie, it gets a little crazy sometimes, but as I coined, be morphable, be allowed to say yes, give yourself the opportunity to find things that you didn't originally realize were a passion, because you have no idea how much fun they can be. And if you just say, no, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be an airline pilot, you may or may not fit that mold. And when you have an opportunity, you might realize that you're the perfect person for this opportunity that just wasn't in your purview at the time. So think outside the box, realize that career trajectories aren't always obvious, and be open to saying yes and trying new things.
And one thing I've noticed for you professional pilots out there, a lot of you, even if you're flying a fancy job and your identity is, pilot of this and so whatever, that was very technical, but all of you seem to wear a lot of different hats. Like I know within your job, you have several different things that you do that do not involve directly flying the airplane. I know CFIs who are also developing websites. I know there's a lot of great aviators, like I think of Captain Chris on Instagram. So he flies for Virgin Atlantic, but he also makes these beautiful videos of his flights, and he's sort of an advocate for aviation. And there's all these different things that even if you do sort of have your quote unquote dream job, there's probably other little skills you have that are sort of adjunctive to that, if that's a word, that give that fulfillment and create that opportunity for you to get that richness out of your life. So along with this, we're going to kind of take a little turn in the next takeaway, which is identity crisis is normal. I love that moment when you're like, you guys were talking about identity crisis, and he was like, what, John? You only had one in your career? I love that he was so open about like the crushing disappointment he had when he was about to make it to the majors, and then they changed the minimums that he needed for the hours. And it was just like another time he just got slapped in the face. And that he said even it took a few years to kind of like have his, again, that cognitive dissonance resolve for him to feel clear about his next steps. That makes me feel so good. And I wish I had known that when I was in my 20s and my 30s. Because I think a lot of what I did was hide my identity crisis. I'm supposed to be a performer, and I've decided to be a teacher. Does that mean I'm less of a performer? Does it mean all of this stuff about my worth? And if someone had just said to me, Geeta, identity crisis is normal. This is a process of discovering who you are and how to match what's inside of you with your outside life. And it takes time. It's just part of growing pains. Oh, that would have been a relief. So I know you've had identity crisis in your career here and there, John, perhaps.
Yeah, one or two. One or two.
It's totally, totally normal.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure that there's more to come. So there's all
Yeah,
of
right.
that. And finally, just the idea that life comes first. Not always are we going to have the exact image of what we want put forth in front of us. Sometimes realize that you may not have exactly what you want, but you do have what you need. And making the best of that. And, again, dovetailing back on the attitude and gratitude and all the rest that we already talked about, it's important to figure out what that is and make full use of it. Your whole life is actually your identity. It's not just, I'm a pilot, and the day I'm not a pilot anymore, for whatever reason that might be, it doesn't mean that my identity's gone. And that's something, it's easy to say, but not always easy to put into practice.
So listeners, wasn't that just a treasure trove of not only inspiration and fun and like hanger flying, but also just a lot of really great perspective from someone who's had a very long career and made a lot of really fantastic choices along the way and just made the most out of every single moment. And we want that all for you as well. So think back on those takeaways. Are there little ways you can kind of start moving in the direction of having those takeaways just be how you do everyday life so that you can feel that fulfilling, enriching career? And wherever your career or flying takes you, when you get a bit older, you can look back at that career and see that it's been full of all the things that you love and the people that matter to you. So to help you in that process, we will link all of Greg's stuff. He's got a lot of it in the show notes. He's got a podcast, which is based off of his Flying Carpet book, which I highly recommend. It's like listening to aviation story time. We'll list his books, his website, his photography, his Facebook group, anything else we need to link, we'll link down there. So please check out the show notes and follow his work, because every time I interact with his Facebook group or I read another little snippet of his book, I feel that same sense of fun and fulfillment. So please do check out all of his great stuff. And for us, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star review. That would really help and would really help other aviators out there who would like this content to find us. So please make sure you follow the show on your favorite podcast player so our episodes get delivered to you. Leave us a 5-star review. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Calm Cockpit Podcast. And we really look forward to seeing you next time and hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we have. And so until next time, please fly smarter
and stress less.
Boston Tower 1 departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 lane.